Because I know what Sabbath afternoon is often like. It involves a little bit of shut-eye, just lying down, a little bit of sleep. And so you are brave souls that you're here, that you're joining us. So really good to see your faces. And thanks for having me once again. I want to talk about this notion of what does it take to flourish in life. Before you do, I want to tell you a little story. A really good friend of mine was driving along in his car one time, minding his own business. And I should tell you that we sit on the other side of the car and are on the other side of the road to you guys. I'm still getting used to that. But anyway, as he's driving along, it just started raining. And you know, when it just starts to rain, the roads can get a little bit slippery because they can have a bit of oil and filmy stuff on there. Anyway, he's driving along and then he just started to merge off the freeway. And as he did, he felt the car, the back of the car just slide out a little. And it was like, whoa, like this. And then, as it was still raining a little bit, and then all of a sudden he went, whoa. And so he quickly corrected it to bring it back straight, but he overcorrected it. And this time the wheels went this way and a little bit further. And he's like, whoa. And so he swung the wheel back around the other direction. And in the end, he said, I was just fishtailing off this ramp as he went. And he said, and then at the last moment as he felt the car go completely sideways and he's sliding down the road now, and he see that on the edge is the rail, the gutter, the small, I don't know what you guys call it over here, but a bit of a lip on a curb. This car hits the curb and goes over. And he said, now I cannot remember how many times the car went over onto its roof and then onto its feet, its wheels, and then to its roof and its feet. And said, in the end though, it came to a stop. And he said, I was just clutching in this cold sweat, still seated there. The windscreen had been smashed, but because it had been raining, the windscreen wipers were still going and going across the screen. And as he sat there just like this, all of a sudden on the radio came the song. What is it? Don't worry, be happy. Now, fortunately, he was completely unhurt, and so that was a very positive thing. But he said, I never forget that moment. And we actually know, my area of expertise is really in physiology, how we're wired together. And I have a particular interest in how our brains are wired. And we actually know that when you have an experience that is highly emotionally charged, you tend to remember it very, very clearly. So it's little wonder, he said, whenever I hear that song on the radio, it comes and plays, instantly I'm back there, I'm clutching the steering wheel, and I'm just in that, I feel like I'm in that hot sweat again. Don't worry, be happy. Don't worry, be happy. You know, that song by Bobby McFarlane, was it? What was that? Was it? Bobby McFerrin. It was a huge sensation. In fact, I think it was the only a cappella song that made it to the top of the charts or whatever. Why was that so? Well, I think partly it's because that message, that idea of don't worry, in particular, be happy, really resonates with us all. So just to illustrate, raise your hand if you don't want to be happy. Okay, have a look around. Oh, look at this. Someone over in the sides here, they've got their hands up here. And that's clearly why they're not sitting in this presentation, because they don't want to be happy, all right? So, but you know, the truth is that most of us want to be happy, don't we? You know, and I love the words of this. This is Anne Frank here, very insightful, wise young girl who wrote this. She said, you know, we all live with the objective of being happy. Our lives are all different, and yet they're the same. We're on this same common quest. And so I have a great interest in happiness. In fact, the conference that I'm here that I'll be attending in Austin over the next few days is actually what's called a happiness science conference. Now, what I want to say is a couple of things. First of all, often when you use the word happy, right, and you'll notice I haven't put it in my presentation title, because often when I say, let's talk about happiness, everyone just goes, oh, Like that just sounds all sort of fluffy and, oh, happy smiley faces, and it's not real. Well, I'm not talking about that kind of fake happiness, right? What I have an interest is the science. You know, what the science says about what we can do to truly experience happiness, real happiness, enduring happiness in our life. So I'm not talking about just a fluffy, fleeting, oh, I'm happy today. What I'm talking about is a deep-centered sense of joy, you know, satisfaction, you know, with life. That kind of happiness. That really intrigues me. In fact, if you wanted a better word for it, you call it something like eudaimonia, right? This is what now, eudaimonia is not a word you hear every day. And actually, I've got, this is my latest book that's just come out, and it's published in Australia, so it's very hard to get over here. So I'm going to leave a free copy for the church here, and so if you want to read it later. But you notice the title of it: Live More Happy, Scientifically Proven Ways to Lift Your Mood in Your Life. You know what? I felt really anxious about putting happy on the title of the book, which seems really odd, doesn't it? Because everyone here indicated they want to be happy, but yet often when we say happy, everyone just goes, that's going to be a fluffy read. You know, there's not going to be anything solid or meaningful on that. And there's about 300 studies, public articles that I refer to in this. The science behind it is incredible. So really, a better word would have been eudaimonia, but it just didn't fit on the page here like this, and people definitely wouldn't have read it then because they wouldn't have had any idea what I was talking about. But this idea of happiness, right? We all want it, but I'm really interested in the deeper type of happiness. And you know, the science behind how to achieve that and what it takes to be truly, authentically happy is fascinating to me. And I have a great interest I have several PhD students that are doing research projects in this area. And so I want to share with you a little bit about that today. So I need to introduce you first of all to a gentleman. This is Professor Morton Seligman. Now raise your hand if you've heard of this guy before. Anyone? Only a couple of you? Okay, well, Professor Morton Seligman was in 1997 voted in as the president of the American Psychological Association, the APA. So this is a big deal, right? So he was, at the time, pretty much at the top of his game. So he had been a very successful psychologist as a clinician and then a researcher. He'd written many books. He'd written a book called Learned Helplessness and a couple of other things. Anyway, in 1997, he was voted in as the president of the American Psychological Association. Now, when you get voted in at the APA as the president of the APA, what they ask you is, what do you want to be the theme for your presidency? What would you like the association to really focus on over the next short period of time while you're the president? And he thought, oh, okay, that's a great question. And they said, well, go away and think about it. So that's exactly what he did. And so he went away, what will I'll take an interest in? Now, throughout his career, he'd had a great interest in learned helplessness. He'd had a great interest in, some other areas of psychology, like, bipolar and schizophrenia and some of these sorts of things. And he thought, so what should we focus on? What should we focus on? Anyway, it was then that he had this fortuitous encounter that changed the whole direction of his presidency and pretty much the direction of his life, and since this time, the direction of many other people's lives, thousands of people's lives as well. And it all happened when he was out weeding the garden. So he says that, Morton Seligman will tell you that he described himself as a nimbus cloud in the house. You know, nimbus clouds, like a storm cloud pretty much. He was like he's a bit of a grump, and he's a bit of a pessimist, and anyway, he said he's out weeding the garden, and as he's pulling out these weeds, he's not enjoying life very much, and he seems like, these weeds, they just keep coming back. Anyway, he said, and then from behind approached his 5-year-old daughter, and his daughter says to him, Dad, and he's like, yeah, what do you want? I'm weeding gardens here, and I don't like weeds very much, and she's going, Dad, and she keeps saying Dad until he turns around and looks at her, and he's holding these weeds. He's like, yes, what is it? And she said, Dad, when I was 3 And I used to whinge and whine and whinge and whine and whinge. And he goes, yeah, I know, I get it. What? Get on with it. And she said, well, you said to me that I needed to learn to stop whinging and whining, and I did. So now I think that you need to learn to stop being such a grump. All right, this is like his 5-year-old kid. And he said he's holding these weeds, and it's like, oh! And it's a light bulb moment. Because what he discovered, what he recognised in that moment, that epiphany, was the epiphany to him, was that as a psychologist, all of his extensive and successful career, he had focused on some negative, if you want, psychological state. He'd focused all of his efforts and energy, and all of his colleagues did as well, on trying to get people that were somewhere, if you wanted to look at the sort of the mental health continuum, the happiness continuum, right? If this is sort of a positive 10 up there, he was focusing on getting people that were somewhere in the negative range, like maybe a -8, and trying to bring them up to a 0, you know, just so that they were normal. Now, I don't know what normal is. I mean, who's normal here? I don't know, whatever that looks like. But he said that all psychology had done for decades and decades had focused on trying to get on people that were in some negative place and just trying to get them up to a 0 so they were functional. He said, but when as psychologists do we ever take just normal people, average people, whoever they are, and then try and help them move this direction further up? And so he actually came back to the American Psychological Association. He said, here is the theme of my presidency. We're going to focus on positive psychology. Positive psychology. Now, this isn't fluffy pop psychology. This is the scientific study of what it takes to help people flourish in life. Right? Not just survive, not just exist, but to actually thrive. What does that take? Anyway, so that's what he kicked off in 1997, and since that time, in the past 2 decades, the positive psychology world has just exploded. As researchers have started to look at, well, what does it take to help individuals, to help couples, to help communities, to help even countries thrive? And in fact, what he did, he wrote a book in 2002, which was titled Authentic Happiness. And then he wrote another one in 2011 called Flourish. And now what Martin Seligman said is that, okay, yeah, that happy word is a bit problematic for some people, but I think there's a better word that really describes what that eudaimonia that I referred to. And he calls it Flourish. And he actually titled his book Flourish. And it's an interesting read. Now, in that book, Martin Seligman identified that the science seems to indicate that you need 5 things going for you in your life in order to truly flourish. And so, I'm going to tell you and share with you briefly today what they are. Now, what I need to say is just 2 weeks ago, I met Professor Martin Seligman at a conference in Melbourne. He was attending, and I got to sit down and have a really good chat with him. He's a lovely guy. And I think he's a happier guy. He wasn't the nimbus cloud that I expected. So maybe over the past 2 decades, his own advice has actually rubbed off on him. But anyway, this is what Professor Martin Seligman proposes in his book titled Flourished. He says that there are 5 things, and they can be represented by this acronym PERMA, or PERMA, as he describes it. So he says these 5 things. Now, what I need to tell you is that I don't like the order that he represents these 5 things in. And the reason for that, and I'll elaborate as I go on, I actually think that some of those 5 things that he has identified actually provide more superficial levels of happiness, and others provide more deeper levels of happiness. And so I've actually communicated with Professor Seligman. I said, you know what, I'd like to rearrange your word, your acronym. And anyway, everyone said to me, you can't do that. That's like it's published and everyone uses it everywhere. And I said, yeah, I know, but I don't really care. So Professor Seligman, how would you feel if I rearranged your word? And he said, yeah, go for it, pretty much. So I have a new order. It is not PERMA, it is Perm. Okay. Now, I know that that is not actually the way that you spell that. Perm is different, but at least the visual is there and that will help you remember. Okay. So here's the question. P-E-A-R-M, perm. 5 things that you need to flourish in life. I'm going to give you 30 seconds right now to talk with the person beside you. See if you can guess what those 5 things are. P-E-A-R-M. Each of them stand for a word that represents the 5 things required to truly flourish in life. I'll give you 30 seconds right now. Go. What do you reckon they might be? Pastor Eugene's got a huge prize for the person who gets them all right, by the way. It was a cash prize, did you say? Okay, well, there you go. Okay, time is up. Let's go. So what do you think? Hands up. What do you think might be, what do you think P might stand for? Purpose, excellent word. But that's not it. Actually, you know what? This is right now. I mean, obviously, I've been a university professor for many years, and I've been told, and I know that it's a really bad teaching practice to go, that's wrong. That's wrong, that's wrong. So, look, I just want to say forgive me. I love your suggestions. They're all great suggestions, and don't feel bad if it's not correct. I love your input. Yes, young man here, what do you think? Positive. Give him a round of applause. Yeah, you are amazing. Okay, here it is. What they know, the science says, is in order for people to truly flourish in life, they need some positive emotion. Or if you want another word for that, pleasure. Now, raise your hand if you don't like pleasure. Yeah. Exactly, we all like pleasure. And is pleasure a bad thing? No, you know what, sometimes, I don't know if I can say this here. I can say it in Australia, and I hope that I'm not politically incorrect to say it here, but sometimes I meet Christians who seem to indicate that pleasure is a bad thing. You know, that we have to be a bit... and I'm thinking, why would people want to become a Christian if that's what it's like? You know, everyone likes pleasure. There is nothing wrong with pleasure. I have a great interest in positive emotion. You know, when we talk about positive emotion, we're talking about joy, peace, contentment, all of these things that, if you want another word for it, many of them are fruits of the Spirit, aren't they? Right? And I have a great interest in that space. In fact, and you can check this one out if you want, and this essentially what I cover in the book. I really do focus on positive emotion. The reason I have a great interest in this area is that we know that today many people are not experiencing positive emotion. I was just sharing with my sister here that in Australia, we know that 1 in 10 Australian adults are taking antidepressants each day. We know in the US it's about 1 in 8, so it's even worse. And look, and I'm not against medications, by the way, but it's a sign that many people, many people are struggling with how they feel. You know, they're not experiencing the positive emotion that they would like. When the science actually indicates that if you look at sort of the continuum of people, well, I take, you know, Australia or the US is much the same. We've probably got 10 to 15% of people that are really quite desperately low. There's about 20% of people each year that will have a mental health crisis. Up the top, you've got about 20% of people who report that they are actually flourishing. And then in between, that's 60%. Probably for many people, look, I wouldn't say I'm depressed, but I'm not really happy either. And I have a great interest in helping resource people to with some really positive, scientifically proven skills to help with that. So yeah, I'll give you the link for this if any of you want to check it out. It's called the Lift Project, and it's like a 10-week educational adventure, I call it, where you explore different scientifically proven ways to lift your mood in your life. I've got 2 PhD students working on projects in this, and really fascinating to see what happens when people recognise that they have choices and that there are things that you can do to actually feel a whole lot better on a daily basis. And some of them work instantly. It's really quite intriguing. I won't dwell too much on this, but in this project, and my research really is all about trying to bring positive psychology and lifestyle medicine, which is another sort of area especially mine, and basic neuroscience all together. So people understand not just what to do, but why it works as well. How we can put our brain in a better place, pretty much. Won't worry about that. However, do you know that there are actually positive emotion is a really great thing to have, and I want everyone to have that. We know that there are a whole lot of benefits. We know that happy people, for example, live a lot longer. Isn't this? In fact, some studies indicate 7 to 10 years longer if you are happier. And some of the studies that have been conducted to demonstrate that are really intriguing. But problems with pleasure. And here are two of the problems. Number one, this is what the science says about people's level of what we'd call enduring happiness, right? Do you know that about 50% of your enduring happiness is determined by your genetics? So have you noticed this? There are some people that just seem to be naturally cheery. Have you noticed that? And there are other people who just are naturally not. Right? So, you know, and I'm not going to pick on people or point people, but there are some people you could say, hey, they're excitable. You know, you'd say, oh, look, we've got a free leaflet here left over. And would you like that? You know, or here you go, I've got one free copy of my book left. Do you want to take that with you? It's like, whoa, it's like, whoa, you know, quick, I've got to Facebook this. I just, you know, they get excited very easily. Whereas other people you could come up to, and I'm not picking on you, Chris, by the way, but you could come and say, hey, guess what? You just won the lottery and Nobel Prize and been voted, you know, just an all-round great guy. And it's like, that's great. You know, so we know that. So there's definitely a genetic element, and they reckon that possibly up to half of our overall sort of how we describe how happy we are on an enduring basis is genetically determined. Now, what I will say, there's another branch of science called epigenetics, for those who are interested, which is challenging that. There's a lot of evidence now that we talk about how, you know, your genes are your fate. Your genes often aren't your fate. What we actually know is that your genes load the gun, but your lifestyle pulls the trigger. And so it's a fascinating area. Epigenetics, look out for that. What we also know is that obviously your circumstances will affect your level of happiness. So, for example, if you can't afford food and you know your relationships might not be so good. When I see, you know, my brother, my own flesh and blood brother, you know, injured like that, I just lost it. And so all of a sudden I'm like this, and all of a sudden I'm speaking, which I was not meant to be doing, and I couldn't stop moving as well, and it was just the funniest thing I've ever seen in my life, right? And so then all of a sudden my mum, who's a bit of a character, she goes, you see her snigger a little bit, very sympathetic towards her child, and then Mrs. Wadsley went, and then it was just one thing after another. People are starting to murmur and giggle. Then the whole thing went belly up when Jesus lost it. And Jesus now is laughing hysterically as well. And I'll tell you what, I remember there was just like tears rolling down my face. The poor Sabbath school leader is like, stop like this, because this is her big production. We'd rehearsed this thing for months. It was a bad scenario. I never got invited back to do a church play. That was the end of my acting career. But, you know, I remember as we drove home in the car, even then, we were just laughing so hard. Tears were still rolling down. And Mum, and you know what? When I think about it today, I still get a chuckle out of it, but it doesn't have that same kind of response. You see, pleasure habituates. You know, if you try and build a flourishing life on the pursuit of pleasure, you're going to run into problems. You need bigger and bigger hits. And it was, you know, John D. Rockefeller that once said, I cannot think of anything less pleasurable than a life dedicated to the pursuit of pleasure. So true. So pleasure, positive emotion. Is it important? Yeah. But I would say it's probably the most superficial kind of flourishing, the most superficial of the steps. P is for pleasure. What is E for? You're not going to get this, by the way, but have a go anyway, and I'll say you're great. Yes? Exercise. Exercise is so important, but that's not the E in PERMA. I won't put you in agony. Let me just tell you, because you wouldn't have got it. Engagement. There is a happiness researcher by the name of, get this, Dr. Cheek Sent Me High. That's his name. Dr. Cheek Sent Me High. His cheeks go high. And he got into happiness research. And he was very interested in what happens to people throughout the course of the day. He put buzzers on people, and then just at random times he would page them, and they'd write down what they were doing and how into it they were, how engaged they were in what they were doing. And do you know what he discovered, unremarkably? That those people who spend a good portion of their time doing things that engage them report high levels of flourishing in life. And you know this to be true. You know, when you get to do stuff that you enjoy, you know, stuff that excites you, stuff and he coined this term called flow. You know what we're talking about? When you're in that state of flow, it's like time either speeds up or, you know, you look up and you go, whoa, look at the time that's passed. That's what that experience of flow is. We need that. It turns out that people need that experience of flow in order to truly flourish in life. Now, what I want to say to you is the ideal scenario is for you to experience flow in the work that you do. Right? And the reason for that is that you spend about a third of your life at work. Most people do. So if you can actually encounter flow, then that's a really positive thing. What I will say about that is it's not what you do that's important, it's actually what it means to you that tends to promote flow. I'll give you illustrate this brief little story of a man walks into a quarry. You know, you have quarries over here where they cut rock. You know, they get bricks, and anyway, he walks in and he walks over to this one guy, this one gentleman there who's working away, and he says to him, he says, well, what are you doing? And the guy looks up and he goes, oh, mate, he says, open your eyes. You can see what I'm doing here, look. He says, we have to cut these stupid bricks out. We carry them over there. It's like hot as. He says, yeah, so just, you know, look around. Anyway, okay. He looks over and there's another guy doing the exact same thing. But he's like, So he walks over to him and he says, hey, mate, he says, I'm interested. What are you doing? He goes, well, we cut these bricks over here. He says, carry them over there. And he says, you know, I just sort of pays the bills. If I can get it done, and, you know, eventually I might even be able to get into the office over there. That'd be a good thing. Air conditioned in there. And then he looks over and there's a third guy, and he is just meticulously making these blocks smooth. And so he walks over to him and he says, hey, mate. He says, what are you doing there? And the guy looks up at him, wide-eyed, and says, he says, we're building a cathedral. You see, for one guy, it was work. For another, it was a potential career. This guy, it was a calling. And what we know that people that have that kind of attitude, you know, they see how they're contributing, then all of a sudden that increases flow in really powerful ways. So as much as you are able, you know, try and pursue work that actually engages you. Now, I know that's not possible for everyone. And if it's not, what I say, it becomes really even more important that you have hobbies that you do. You know, stuff that you enjoy doing just for the sake of doing it. You need those experiences of flow, you know, having things that engage you in your life to truly flourish. So, P, pleasure, positive emotion. Yeah, it's really important, but it's probably more of the superficial form of flourishing. A level below, engagement. You need things that captivate your attention. But then we move to A. Anyone know what A might stand? Oh, you got it. Did you know that? Have you read it before? You are good. Wow. Achievement. You know, the science indicates that in order to truly flourish in life, you need things that fill you with a sense of accomplishment, a sense of achievement when you get them done. More so for some people than others. For example, do we have any, I call them list tickers here? Any list tickers? You know what, if you're a list ticker, you already know what I'm talking about. What's a list ticker? Exactly. You know, if you're a list ticker, and I'm a bit of a list ticker, before you even open your eyes in the morning, that list rolls down, doesn't it? And you're starting to write down, yeah, going to get that done, got to do that. Now, if you're a list ticker, how good does it feel to tick the things off the list? It's like, woo, yeah, I'm ticking it. And if you're a list ticker, what about if you get through all the items that day? Relationships tend to magnify emotions. Right, so what the reality is that if relationships are bad, you can actually be taken to lower lows. If the relationships are good, you'll reach higher highs. Right, so you think about the happiest times in your life, it probably was other people that helped you get there. Think about the worst times in your life. It was possibly other people that helped you get there as well. And so it just goes to show the value and the importance of nurturing relationships. Because happiness is not about the what, it's about the who. I love there's a internationally known happiness researcher by the name of Dr. Robert Biswas-Diener. And he is a fascinating character because instead of doing sort of laboratory-based research, sometimes they call him the Indiana Jones in happiness research. He actually goes out and lives with different groups of people all around the world and studies what it is that makes them happy. And this whole idea of relationships just hit home to him one time when he was living for a period of time with the Kalahari Bushmen. Now he's lived in Mumbai in the slums in Calcutta, in India. He's lived with an Inuit in Greenland. All these different parts. He said he spent this time living with the Kalahari Bushmen. And he said this day we went out on a hunt with the men. And so the men of the tribe, he said, we go out and all day, he said it was a scorching hot day. You're out in the African savannah or whatever it is, it's just really hot. And he says, and we're going around and they've got their bows and arrows and it's really hard to hunt stuff with bows and arrows apparently. And he said a couple of times we got close and then this thing, the prey would be gone. And at the end of the day, after this long day, he said we travelled so many miles, all exhausted. He said it was time we realised, no, today's not fruitful. It's time to head back to the camp. And so he said when the men decided, yes, let's head back to the village now. He said, and they turned, and he said as they turned, they started to sing. But it wasn't a forlorn song. It wasn't, woe is us. It was actually upbeat. And he said, this puzzled him. Here he was completely exhausted and exasperated by the day. And yet there was almost this happy tone, this happy beat, lifting them all the way home. And he said, I turned to one of the bushmen there and I said to them, he says, excuse me, he said, I'm interested. He says, you seem happy even though we didn't catch anything. And the man looks at him, somewhat puzzled by this question. And then he says, we did not catch anything, but we did not catch anything together. You see, relationships is what makes the world go around. And you know what? You can have, even if those other things aren't going so well for you, but you have positive relationships. Life can flourish for you. This is where I think the beauty, the genius of church communities like this. Where people have connections, where people, Martin Seligman says that one of the great ways to know if you have positive relationships is how many people do you have in your life that you could call at 3 a.m. if you needed to. That's a good sign. Do you have people like that? I certainly hope belonging to a church community like this you do. Makes all the difference. So relationships. Let's say it together. The things that you need to flourish. Number 1, pleasure. Number 2, engagement. Number 3, achievement. 4, and then M is for meaning. You were close. Meaning. There's a picture of Dr. Robert Biswas-Diener. Hey, let me just, before I'm going to finish now and I'm talking about meaning, but here's an interesting thing. Do you know now the science indicates that happiness and unhappiness is socially contagious, 3 degrees of separation. So what that means is in a social network, right, even amongst, if there is a person who becomes happier or unhappy, then the friends of their friends will be affected. Isn't this interesting? Even though they're not directly related. So what we know is that happiness is a social phenomenon. It's socially contagious. M is for meaning. What does meaning look like? What is meaning? Well, what I find so completely intriguing is that this research is all coming out of secular psychology. So this is not informed by Christianity at all, or religion or anything like that. This is just secular psychologists, right, who are doing all the studies and trying to identify what it is that helps people to flourish in life. And they define meaning as this: belonging to and serving something bigger than the self. How Christian is that? You know, if I wanted to think about what would be the best way to achieve that, to have that sense that you belong to and that you contribute to something bigger than yourself, I would say it's the Christian worldview. You know, the whole idea that that God has this family, you know, that he's passionately interested in, and that we belong to that. We're part of that. But go one step further, he actually has a unique part for us to play in all this, in his purposes. We belong. We have a part to play, to contribute, to serve. And what we know is that when people do that, it seems to give them the greatest sense of flourishing in their life. And I don't know if it's your experience, but I've met people, you know, and there are maybe even periods in your life when the P, the E, the A, even the R maybe weren't going so great, but if you still have that M, then it can still set you up for a truly deep level of flourishing in your life.